Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy McInnes, and I'm a teacher at Howard Middle School, and I'm working toward my EDS in leadership here at Columbus State University. And my partner will introduce herself now.
Hey y'all, I'm Chelsea Stump and I teach at Callaway High School, and I'm also working on my EDS in leadership at CSU. And we are going to begin our presentation once we get the PowerPoint going.
Okay. Okay, so we have an article on mixed methods research. This goes hand in hand with Chapter 9 in our textbook. The article that we got was from the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, and it was entitled Mixed Methods Sampling a Typology with Examples. We're going to, obviously we have our introductions here. We're going to be looking at the background and definitions contained within the article and within the textbook, mixed methods sampling techniques, mixed methods prototypes, and of course guidelines for mixed methods research.
We're going to start with a recap of the major methods of data collection. This is outlined in Chapter 9 in the textbook. The first type of data collection is a test. This is most commonly used in quantitative research. It is used to measure attitudes, personality, self-perceptions, aptitude, and performance of research participants. Most commonly, tests are standardized, and either they are used by state or district entities, or experimenters and researchers will develop their own tests in order to measure specific constructs. The second type of data collection method is a questionnaire. This is typically filled out by a participant of the research study, and it's a self-report of this data collection. It is used to obtain information about thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, values, perceptions, personality, and behavioral intentions of the participant. Interviews are another way to collect data, and there's two types of interviews, quantitative and qualitative. In quantitative interviewing, there is an interview protocol or a script that is written and provided by the researcher that's then read to the interviewee by the interviewer. And the answers are very closed, and there is not an open-ended possibility. The goal with a quantitative interview is to standardize what the interviewee sees in order to get valid responses. In a qualitative interview, the questions are much more open-ended. And within qualitative interviewing, there are three types of interviews. In informal conversational interview, this is very spontaneous, loosely structured. Often the researcher will just take field notes instead of specifically asking already designed questions. There's the interview guide approach, where there is a plan before the interview and there is an interview protocol, but the questions don't have to be asked in any specific order. The final type of qualitative interviewing is the standardized open interview. And this is where there is an interview protocol, but the responses are open-ended. There's no set answer for the interviewee to choose from. A fourth type of data collection is a focus group, and this is simply a group interview. There's a moderator, and it's usually a small group of individuals that are being questioned, and the moderator is there to keep the group focused on a topic, and they must have good interpersonal skills and know how to facilitate a discussion. In an observation, the fifth type of data collection, the researchers are watching for behavioral patterns of the people. There are two types of these environments, laboratory or naturalistic. And a laboratory is set up by the researcher, and the observation is very clear. Often it's through a one-way window or a way in which the people being observed are not aware. In a naturalistic observation, the researcher is in a real-world situation. Within this type of observation, there is also quantitative and qualitative observation. In quantitative observation, it's standardized, often used to obtain reliable data. The researchers use a checklist or other data collection instruments. In qualitative observation, They're looking for relative data, they're taking field notes, but unlike with quantitative observation, there's no specification in advance as to what is going to be observed. The researcher is considered the data collection instrument. They're taking field notes and recording what they see. And the researcher can take 4 different roles. They can either be a complete participant, where they become a member of a group, almost going undercover. They can be a participant as observer, where they become a member of the group, but the group knows that they are there as a researcher. They can act as an observer as participant, where the participants know about the study, but the researcher's interaction is limited. They might attend a faculty meeting or a PTA meeting in the school, but they're not interacting heavily with the individuals participating in the study. Finally, they could be a complete observer, where they don't inform the group that they are being studied and they observe from a distance. The next type of data collection is visual data collection, and this is usually photography. It's collected quantitative in a quantitative manner. And then finally is the use of constructed and secondary or existing data. And this is when data is produced by the participants during the study, such as drawings, paintings, recordings, or is secondary data that was completed prior to the study or at a different time. Next, we'll talk about how to begin a research process. We've talked about this in class and throughout this course frequently. Step 1, you're identifying the problem and the research questions that you're going to address. As we all know so far, you do the literature review and look at previous studies to identify those questions. Step 2 is choosing your appropriate research method. Which of the 6 methods will be used, and will they be quantitative or qualitative? And that leads to step 3, where you're choosing your method of data collection. Will it be quantitative or qualitative? And then when you're using this data collection, there is a mixed research aspect that can be used. As our textbook notes, the fundamental principle of mixed research is mixing of methods, procedures, and other paradigm characteristics in order to conduct high-quality research. Within this, there's 2 types of mixed research. First is inter-method mixing. This is where you are using 2 or more methods of data collection within the research. In intra-method mixing, instead of using different types of data collection, you are using both quantitative and qualitative data. An example of this would be using a questionnaire of some sort that asks questions that provide quantitative and qualitative answers to the research questions or to whatever is included in the questionnaire.
Okay, now, of course, we're going to start with our article here, Mixed Method Sampling, a Typology with Examples by Charles Tedley or Tedley and Finn Yu. What they've done in the article is they've looked at different mixed method sampling techniques, and there is a comparison of probability purposive and probability mixed purposive sampling. The 4 prototypes that are introduced, you have basic mixed method sampling, sequential mixed method sampling, concurrent mixed method sampling, and multi-level mixed method sampling, different types of mixed method sampling. And we will look over guidelines for mixed method sampling as well that are given to us in the article. The types of sampling, we have probability sampling, which is primarily used in quantitatively oriented studies. The aim of this particular type of sampling is to achieve representativeness, that's a word, to accurately represent an entire population. Purposive sampling is primarily used in qualitative studies, and it may be defined as selecting units based on specific purposes associated with answering a research study's question. And then, of course, there's convenient sampling, drawing samples that are easily accessible, willing to participate in the studies. Obviously, these the names for these particular types of samplings, they kind of define themselves. With probability sampling, we have 3 types. We have random, That's the most common. That's what you probably associate with sampling, random sampling. It says each unit is accessible, or in the accessible population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. Think of somebody drawing numbers or names out of a hat, or telling a computer to give you to spit out some numbers and you choose from there. Stratified sampling, when the researcher wants various subgroups to be represented. An example I can think of is when you have cats and dogs, and you want to look at whether or not animals who are domesticated or that are domesticated like living with their owners, or if they want to live in the wild, and you want to know whether or not these domesticated animals have an opinion on this. So you would ask the cats and you would ask the dogs, and you take random samples from the cats and from the dogs, and then you put those together, and that's how you get your stratified sampling. Of course, obviously, we can't talk to cats and dogs. And then, of course, we have cluster sampling, clusters that naturally occur, such as neighborhoods, schools, or hospitals within a particular area. This means you're not going to be getting samples all across the country. So you can look at, if you want to look at a rural school, you look at a rural school or hospital near you. That's where cluster sampling comes in. Then, of course, we have purposive sampling. Now, the authors also break purposive sampling into 4 parts as well. We have sampling to achieve representativeness or comparability, sampling special or unique cases, sequential sampling, and sampling using multiple purposive techniques. Sampling to achieve representativeness or comparability is used when the researcher wants to select a purposive sample that represents a broader group of cases as closely as possible, or set up comparisons among different types of cases. This involves 2 goals: sampling to find instances that are representative of a particular type of case, and sampling to achieve comparability across different types of cases, like looking at outliers. Next is sampling special or unique cases. This type of purposive sampling is unique in itself, in that one would use it to show primary importance rather than an overall issue. This is the type of sampling done when researchers are just starting to gain access to a particular phenomenon. Sequential sampling involves the principle of gradual selection. Now, this is the sequential selection of units based on their relevance to the research question. The author notes 4 types of purposive sampling techniques that involve sequential sampling: theoretical sampling, confirming and disconfirming cases, opportunistic sampling, and snowball sampling. The authors give us an example of theoretical sampling on awareness of dying. The researchers went to a variety of sites relevant to their emerging theory regarding the different types of awareness of dying. Each site provided unique information that the previous site had not. The sites varied from premature babies to comatose patients and cancer wards. It was a gradual selection that led them from place to place. Sampling using multiple purposive techniques involves using 2 or more of these strategies. Usually, these strategies are employed when doing qualitative studies. An example is a study done on abuse and oppression of women. This study, done by Poorman in 2002, used 4 different types of purposive sampling techniques in selecting the participants for a series of focus groups.
And when you're looking at probability and purposive sampling, there are similarities and differences. The basic similarities are that both provide a sample that will answer the research questions, and both are concerned with transferability and external validity. The similarities in there, though. And the biggest differences are going to begin with the size of the sample. In a probability designed research type, there's a large sample size. And they're focusing on getting a large representativeness of the population. There's an informal sampling time frame, and they focus on narrative data and expert judgment. Or sometimes they generate numeric data, but normally they are using more qualitative data. In a purposive study, the sample size is much smaller, and the focus is on the depth of data and the depth of understanding of their research questions. There is a formal sampling time frame and a focus on numeric data and mathematical equations. Occasionally, there is narrative data included. Then you get into a purposive mixed probability sampling. And the researchers and authors of our article basically presented a continuum where you have purposive on one side, probability on the other, and the mixed methods in the middle. Tasha Corey and Tedley defined the strand of research design in 3 phases: conceptualization, experimental, and inferential. And basically, the design will have either a qualitative or quantitative strand. What this means is if all 3 aspects of the design have a majority of qualitative data, then it is a qualitative strand. If it is majority quantitative, then it is a quantitative strand. And within these strategies, you have 4 sampling strategies. The first is basic. Basic sampling strategies, as far as sampling, is also defined as purposive random sampling. And normally, you are going to be looking for narrative data. With sequential or concurrent sampling, there are very well-known design types, and authors have described these in great detail. When you're looking at the basic, there is not as much information, and the questions that the author of the article even brings up is whether a whole new language of methodology needs to be defined for that strategy. The last strategy is multi-level, and when you're looking at multi-level sampling strategies, basically what that means is that you're looking at different levels of a system. For example, you would begin at the district level, then you move to a specific school, then you continue further to a specific classroom, and then possibly to a specific student. So you are narrowing from kind of a top-down approach as you look at the research. And finally, the last aspect of the article that was provided were guidelines for using mixed method sampling. The first guideline is that your sample must stem logically from the research question. Basically, what this is saying is your research question must, in some way, be addressed. You cannot choose a methodology that does not address your research questions. Second is to follow the assumptions of the probability and purposive sampling techniques that are being used. Third, generate thorough qualitative and quantitative databases on the research questions under study. The fourth guideline is allow the researchers to draw clear inferences from both the qualitative and quantitative data. Fifth, the strategy must be ethical. As we saw in our last module, there is a very detailed list of ethics that researchers are to follow when using human subjects. And regardless of the type of method that is being used, this must be in place. Six, the sampling strategy must be feasible and efficient. This study must be designed in a way that makes sense and that can be completed based on the population and the questions and research that is being designed. Seventh, the research you must allow the research team to transfer or generalize their conclusions to other individuals, groups, contexts, and so forth. As we've learned, this is a big part of making sure that that research is valid. It must be transferable. Finally, the sampling strategy used, must be in enough detail so that other investigators can understand what they did and use those strategies in future studies. This possibility of replicating and duplicating the design in other populations or areas.
Okay, and this concludes our presentation. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.